She was a struggling single mom, tired, broke, and holding her sick baby with no idea how she'd survive the week. He was a millionaire CEO, riding the city bus to stay grounded. When she fell asleep on his shoulder, she had no idea who he was. And when she woke up, what he said changed everything. The clock blinked 4:03 a.m. in glowing red letters as Sarah Mitchell stood by the cracked window of her tiny one-bedroom apartment, gently rocking her feverish one-year-old son, Noah, in her arms. His cheeks were flushed, his little fingers clenched into her hoodie, and every few minutes he whimpered with pain. She'd tried everything: cool claws, lullabies, a half dose of the last baby medicine she could afford. But nothing eased his fever. She pressed her lips to his damp forehead and whispered, "Shh, Mama's here, baby. Just hold on a little longer." Her own stomach growled. She hadn't eaten since yesterday morning. She'd given her last meal to Noah. Her hands trembled not just from hunger, but from fear. The rent was 10 days late. The landlord had already slipped a warning under her door, written in red ink. Her fingers brushed across the table, picking up the envelope she'd received just hours ago. Her termination letter. "We're sorry," it read, "but due to repeated tardiness, we are forced to let you go." They didn't care why she was late. They didn't ask. Her babysitter had quit. Again. Noah's father? Gone before he was even born. A man who had promised forever and disappeared the moment she said, "I'm pregnant." Tears slipped down Sarah's face, but she quickly wiped them away. She couldn't fall apart now, not with Noah still in her arms. At 6:15 a.m., as the gray light of morning crept into the room, Sarah bundled Noah in his only winter jacket, a hand-me-down that barely fit, and stepped outside into the biting New York cold. She wrapped her coat around him, shielding his little body from the wind. The city was already waking up. Horns honked in the distance. Coffee carts steamed on corners. But none of it mattered. Her only thought was to reach the downtown charity center before the line wrapped around the block. They might give her a can of formula or even diapers if she was lucky. She clutched Noah's diaper bag like it was her lifeline. Inside, there was a bottle, 2 wipes, and a folded grocery receipt she couldn't throw away. The last proof she'd ever had a full cart. The bus screeched to a stop in front of her. Sarah climbed on, dropping her last few quarters into the fare box. She avoided the driver's eyes. She didn't want pity. The bus was mostly empty. A few construction workers, a nurse in scrubs, and one sharply dressed man near the middle, scrolling through his phone. Sarah shuffled toward the back, but her knees buckled slightly. She hadn't slept in 2 days. Her head spun. Noah had stopped crying, finally lulled into a tired, feverish daze in her arms. She spotted an empty seat next to the man in the black coat. Without thinking, she sat down, her body folding like a wilted flower. Her arms ached from carrying Noah, her back burned from tension, and her eyelids felt like they were weighed down with bricks. The man beside her didn't move, didn't even glance up. Sarah's head drooped forward. She shook it, trying to stay awake. But the hum of the bus, the warmth of the seat, and the silent presence beside her melted her exhaustion into surrender. Slowly her head leaned over, unintentionally, and came to rest against the stranger's shoulder. She was too far gone to notice how expensive his coat felt beneath her cheek, too tired to wonder what he might think. She just knew one thing. For the first time in days, she didn't feel like she was drowning. The stranger froze for half a second. He glanced sideways at her, a young woman with wind-tangled hair, sunken eyes, and a baby pressed against her chest. He saw the torn seams on her coat, the calluses on her hands, the fatigue written into her bones. He said nothing. Instead, he shifted just slightly, carefully, so her head wouldn't slip off. Outside the bus window, the city blurred by in streaks of gray and gold. Inside the bus, Sarah finally slept. A deep, heavy sleep, the kind only someone completely broken could fall into. She didn't know it yet, but this moment, this accidental rest on a stranger's shoulder, would change her life forever. What she saw as weakness, he saw as strength, quiet and unspoken. And what he never expected was how her presence would stir something in him he hadn't felt in years. Not pity, not guilt, but something dangerously close to hope. Daniel Carter didn't look like a man who took the bus. Not today, not ever. He wore a charcoal wool coat that fell perfectly over his tall frame, a sleek leather briefcase resting on his lap, and Italian dress shoes that had never touched a puddle. His face, clean-shaven and calm, looked like it belonged in a Forbes feature, not on a weathered city seat. But there he was, riding the number 26 crosstown bus like an ordinary commuter. It was a quiet tradition he'd started 5 years ago. Grounding Day. Once a year after the end of quarter investor meetings, after the boardroom lights dimmed and the applause faded, Daniel ditched the chauffeured car and got on a city bus. Not for show, not for press, but to remember. To remember the hunger, the fear, and the strength it took to grow out of a world that wanted him forgotten. His fingers tightened briefly around the worn leather handle of his briefcase. Inside was a report projecting Carter Tech's next move into Asia. Numbers, deals, futures. Everyone in the room had praised him hours ago, said he was a visionary, a machine. But he didn't feel like a machine. He felt tired. Just as that thought passed, the woman slid into the seat beside him. He noticed her before she even touched him. She moved like someone holding back pain, like she didn't want anyone to see how close she was to breaking. A young woman, no more than 30, cradling a baby wrapped in an old fleece blanket. Her coat had loose buttons. Her face was pale, but what struck him most were her hands, trembling slightly as she held the diaper bag close to her side, like it contained her last thread of dignity. Daniel didn't stare. He just watched, quietly. Then she leaned toward him, not with intention, but from exhaustion. Her head touched his shoulder, gently, like a falling leaf landing on solid ground. At first, Daniel stiffened out of reflex, not because he minded, but because it had been years since anyone touched him with such complete vulnerability. He looked down. She was asleep. Her lashes were long, her lips parted just slightly. There were dark circles beneath her eyes, and her breathing had already deepened into something heavy. Not peaceful, but desperate. The kind of sleep people fall into when life finally shuts them down. Daniel should have pulled away. People didn't lean on CEOs. Strangers didn't sleep on his shoulder. His assistant would have panicked if she saw this, thought he was being taken advantage of. But Daniel didn't move. Instead, he turned his shoulder just slightly so she could rest more comfortably. Because something about her, something wordless and sharp, pierced through the polished armor he wore every day. She reminded him of someone, his mother, back in Detroit, back when they had one blanket between them and no heat in winter. She'd once walked 5 miles in the snow for a bag of groceries. She worked 3 cleaning jobs and still came home with a smile that said, "We'll be okay." Daniel hadn't seen that woman in over a decade. She'd passed away before he made his first million. Never got to see his glass office or hear her name mentioned in a speech. But she was here, in the shape of this stranger, in the worn fabric of her coat, in the way she held her baby like the world could fall apart and she'd still protect him. The baby stirred once, gave a soft whimper, then nestled deeper into her chest. Daniel's chest ached. This woman didn't ask for help, didn't beg, didn't even know he was watching. She had the look of someone who'd stopped expecting kindness. He stared out the bus window, but his mind was racing. Who was she? What had she lost? And why, in a sea of strangers, did she feel so familiar? The bus rattled through Midtown, then past the empty benches and rusted fences that framed the east side. The sun had risen now, casting a dull gold light over the quiet streets. Inside the bus, time felt suspended. Like this moment didn't belong to reality, but to something softer, something raw. As the bus began to slow for the final terminal, Daniel glanced at the clock. 7:47 a.m. He shifted carefully. The woman stirred. He didn't want to startle her. He just touched her shoulder, gently, like waking a child. "Miss," his voice was low, soft. "We've reached the end of the line." She blinked, confused, disoriented, then alarmed. Her eyes darted from her baby to her purse to his coat, and widened when she realized her head had been resting on him. "Oh my God," she whispered, mortified. I didn't mean..." I'm so sorry. I must have. Daniel smiled. A real smile, not the boardroom kind. It's okay, he said, voice calm like a warm cup of tea. You looked like you needed it. Her mouth opened slightly, then closed. She looked like someone who hadn't heard a kind word in a long time. She nodded, hugged her baby tighter, and stood to leave, but not before giving him one last glance, eyes full of embarrassment, and something else. Surprise. As she stepped off the bus, Daniel sat still for a moment longer, watching her figure disappear into the busy street. He didn't know her name, didn't know her story, but something inside him whispered, that wasn't just a woman on a bus, that was something else entirely. And for the first time in years, the man in the black coat didn't feel alone. The gentle tap on Sarah's shoulder felt like an earthquake. Her body jerked upright as if pulled by invisible strings. Her heart pounded, instantly awake, and panic flooded her like cold water. Her eyes darted around the bus, and she realized, mortified, where her head had just been. Resting on the shoulder of a stranger, a man in a suit, a very expensive coat now marked by the faint imprint of her cheek. I, I'm so sorry, she gasped, pulling Noah closer, her voice catching. I didn't mean, God, I didn't even realize. She couldn't finish. Shame swallowed her words. Her cheeks turned crimson. Her eyes refused to meet his. Her body screamed to run off the bus, grab her child, and disappear into the crowd. Her breath hitched, not from exhaustion now, but from humiliation. How pathetic must she look? But the man didn't frown. He didn't pull away in disgust. He didn't wipe his coat or raise an eyebrow or mutter, "It's fine," just to be polite. Instead, he smiled, warm, sincere, and a little sad. You look like you needed the rest, he said, voice steady as a promise. That stunned her more than any scolding could have. She blinked, searching his face for sarcasm. A trap, some kind of insult wrapped in kindness. But there was none. Just calm gray eyes and a softness she wasn't expecting from someone dressed like the upper crust of Manhattan. Noah stirred against her chest, letting out a weak cough. Sarah bounced him lightly, more from nerves than to soothe him. She cleared her throat. He's been sick, she mumbled. Didn't sleep all night. I haven't either. Still, Daniel didn't look away. Something about him invited truth. Like maybe he'd sat in dark rooms too. Held people together when they were falling apart. Her fingers fidgeted with the frayed strap of her diaper bag. I lost my job yesterday, she admitted, barely above a whisper. Part-time cleaning. They said I was late too many times. I was, but... She glanced down at Noah. It's hard when it's just me. Daniel's face didn't change. He didn't flinch or pity her. He listened, really listened, and leaned forward slightly, as if she was saying something far more valuable than spreadsheets or contracts. I'm sorry to hear that, he said gently. Sarah nodded, her throat tightening. She looked away toward the bus window. I'm on my way to a charity office, hoping they still have formula left. Sometimes they run out by 9. She didn't know why she was saying all this. Maybe because he felt safe, or maybe because when you carry your pain long enough, it spills out even when you try to hold it in. But she didn't cry. Not in front of him. She hadn't cried in public since the day Noah's father left. Daniel reached into the inside pocket of his coat and pulled out a business card. Smooth, thick paper, embossed letters in black and gold. He held it out to her. Call this number tomorrow, he said simply. I think I can help. Sarah hesitated. She stared at it like it might bite her. Her hand hovered above it for a moment before she took it. Why? She asked, suspicion slipping through. You don't even know me. Daniel's expression didn't waver. Sometimes you don't need to know everything, he said. Sometimes it's enough to see someone who needs a door open. A pause stretched between them. Sarah looked down at the card again. Daniel Carter, CEO, Carter Tech. Her stomach dropped. She'd heard that name before. Carter Tech was always in the news. Innovations, tech awards, million-dollar donations to schools and hospitals. This wasn't just some corporate suit on a bus. This was the Daniel Carter. Now her head spun for a different reason. Why would a man like him help her? I don't want charity, she blurted before she could stop herself. Daniel's eyes softened even more. It's not charity. It's a chance. The bus squealed to a final stop. The doors hissed open. Sarah looked out. The city pulsed beyond the glass, busy and cold, as if it didn't care whether she stepped out or stayed lost. Her heart beat faster. Do you do this for everyone who falls asleep on you? She asked, half joking, half nervous. He chuckled, and it was low and honest. No, he said, just the ones who remind me of something important. Sarah stood slowly. Her legs still felt weak. She slipped the card into Noah's diaper bag like it was a fragile treasure. Thank you, she said quietly. Daniel nodded once. Call me. Then she was gone. He watched her through the window as she crossed the street, the wind catching the strands of her hair, the baby pressed tight to her chest. She never looked back. Daniel leaned against the seat and exhaled. He wasn't sure why he gave her his card. He didn't do this, but something about her made him break rules. And somewhere, deep in his chest, something had just begun to stir. Sarah almost didn't go. The card sat on the tiny kitchen table, its gold letters glinting in the morning light, daring her to believe it was real, daring her to believe that something good might actually happen to her. But that was dangerous thinking. Good things didn't last in Sarah's world. Still, something about the man on the bus, his eyes, his calm voice, the way he saw her, had cracked through the armor she'd built to survive. So the next morning, running on 3 hours of broken sleep and 1 cup of watered-down coffee, Sarah bundled Noah in a hand-me-down jacket, packed a bag with crackers and wipes, and headed downtown. The train ride was nerve-wracking. Her coat still smelled faintly of baby formula, her hair wasn't perfectly brushed, and her boots had scuffed soles. She kept checking the address again and again, like it might change. Carter Tech. The building loomed like a palace of glass, rising above the city like something from another life. Sarah stood on the sidewalk, looking up at its sheer size, her heart pounding so loudly she could barely hear the city around her. This is a mistake. He won't remember me. Or worse, he will, and he'll laugh. But she couldn't turn back, not with Noah asleep against her shoulder, his little breath warm on her neck. So she took a breath, clutched the card in one trembling hand, and walked through the giant revolving doors. Inside was another world, sleek marble floors, soft piano music, a receptionist in a navy blazer who looked like she belonged on magazine covers. Sarah hesitated, ready for the dismissal. Hi, she said, her voice cracking a little. I was told to come here. Yesterday on the bus, I met Ms. Mitchell? The receptionist smiled warmly before she could finish. Mr. Carter's expecting you. Sarah blinked. What? Please take the elevator to the 38th floor. Someone will meet you there. This had to be a dream, or a prank. But the woman wasn't mocking her. She stood and offered to help carry the baby bag, even handed Sarah a small bottle of water. The elevator ride was silent except for Noah's soft breathing. Sarah stared at her reflection in the mirrored wall. What am I doing here? The doors opened with a quiet ding, and a young assistant was already waiting. Right this way, Miss Mitchell. Everything smelled like expensive coffee and fresh ideas. Open spaces, warm lights. The air itself felt confident. Sarah walked like she didn't belong, heart thudding with each step. And then, through tall glass doors, she saw him, Daniel Carter, standing by a floor-to-ceiling window, hands in his pockets, suit tailored like a second skin. But when he turned and smiled, it wasn't a CEO's smile. It was the same one she'd seen on the bus, the one that made her believe, for just a second, that she was more than a burden. Sarah, he greeted, glad you came. She opened her mouth, but words failed, so she nodded. Daniel gestured toward a chair. Please sit. She lowered herself carefully, shifting Noah as he stirred. She finally managed. I wasn't sure this was real. He chuckled softly. I get that a lot. There was a pause. Then Daniel handed her a folder. I had my HR team pull your application from 3 years ago. You applied for an office admin role here back then. Your resume was solid. Great reviews from your old job at Bayfield Realty. Fast learner, detail-oriented, professional. Sarah felt her breath catch. She had applied before she got pregnant, before everything fell apart. I never got a call back, she whispered. Daniel's eyes softened. That wasn't your fault. We had a freeze that month. But if I'd seen this back then, I would have called. She blinked rapidly, trying not to cry. I'm offering you a position, he said. Entry level, but with full benefits, flexible hours, and on-site childcare. We'll train you in software scheduling. It's not a favor, Sarah. You earned it. She stared at him, stunned. But I've been out of work. I haven't touched an office computer in 2 years. And Noah will help with both, he said gently. Our childcare center just opened last quarter. And, he paused, then added quietly, I arranged for Dr. Lena Hobbs to look at Noah today, one of the best pediatricians in the city. She'll see you at noon. Sarah's mouth dropped open. I can't afford that. Daniel shook his head. You don't have to. She's covered under our new employee health initiative, something I've been meaning to launch for a while. You reminded me what's at stake. The room blurred, not from stress, from gratitude, from disbelief. Sarah looked down at her son, then back at Daniel. Why are you doing this? He hesitated, then said the truest thing he'd said all day. Because someone once did it for my mom. And because when you fell asleep on my shoulder, it reminded me that not everyone who's strong gets seen. Sarah swallowed hard. No one had ever said anything like that to her before. She didn't know what to say, so she just nodded. Her lips trembled. Okay, she whispered. Daniel smiled. Welcome to Carter Tech, Ms. Mitchell. In that glass tower, on a day she thought would be another in a long line of failures, Sarah felt something shift. Hope. Not the kind that whispers and fades, the kind that plants roots. And she didn't know it yet, but her life had just taken a turn, not towards survival, but towards something far deeper belonging. Sarah arrived every morning 20 minutes early, not because anyone told her to, but because she was determined to earn this chance, to prove she belonged not just in the building, but in the kind of life she'd only ever watched through windows. She started in the admin department, answering calls, organizing schedules, creating spreadsheets. At first, her hands shook on the keyboard. She second-guessed every email, every word. But Daniel had been right. She learned fast. Within weeks, she was catching mistakes others missed. She became the quiet anchor of her team, calm under pressure, kind under stress. She didn't talk much, but when she did, people listened. There was something about her strength, unpolished but real, that made others stand a little straighter around her. People started noticing. The office manager asked her to train new hires. A vice president complimented her problem-solving during a system outage. Daniel watched from a distance. He didn't hover, never singled her out, never pulled rank. But sometimes in meetings, his eyes found hers when a report was well done. When she spoke up with a simple, smart idea, he nodded, just a flicker, but it meant everything. He saw her, and Sarah felt it, like warmth in the middle of winter. At first, they passed each other in hallways with polite smiles. Then, after a late charity event, they ended up walking out together. He offered her a ride. She declined. I like walking, she said. It's quiet, and Noah usually falls asleep. Daniel nodded. A few nights later, he walked with her anyway. The snow was falling softly, the city muffled under its white hush. Sarah pushed the stroller carefully, and Daniel walked beside her with his hands in his pockets, his breath curling into the cold. You didn't have to, she said, glancing sideways. He smiled. Maybe not, but I wanted to. It wasn't a pickup line. It was just honest. That night, they talked about their mothers. Sarah told him about nights when she watered down formula so it would last, about the guilt, the fear, the endless, exhausting decisions that single mothers had to make. Daniel shared something few people knew. He'd grown up in foster care. His mother died when he was 7. He'd moved through 4 homes in 5 years. The kindness of one foster family had saved him, taught him to fight for his future. I made a promise when I was 15, he said. If I ever made it, I'd never forget where I came from. Sarah didn't say anything, but her heart felt like it had been handed something precious. Not money, not help, understanding. Over time, their moments became small, sacred things. Lunches, where he'd sit across from her in the cafe and ask, "How's Noah today?" Afternoons where she'd leave notes on reports he had to review, careful and neat. Mornings where he brought two coffees and pretended it was an accident. He never crossed a line, never made her feel like she owed him. But Sarah began to look forward to Mondays, to briefings, to team huddles, to the way his voice softened when he said her name. And Daniel? He couldn't stop noticing her, the way she made every space feel calmer, the way she never asked for praise but earned it anyway, the way she made people believe in things again, even without meaning to. One afternoon, he stopped outside the daycare on the third floor. Through the window, he saw Noah, tiny and bright-eyed, giggling as he reached for bubbles. Sarah sat beside him, her coat off, sleeves rolled up, helping the staff clean paint from the table. Daniel watched them both for a long time. That night, he couldn't sleep, because somewhere along the way, something had changed. She wasn't just the woman from the bus anymore. She was the woman he looked for in every meeting, the voice he waited to hear, the strength he admired. Not because she was perfect, but because she kept showing up, even after the world had knocked her down. He didn't know if it was love, not yet, but it was something, and it was growing. Spring began to melt the snow. Sarah now walked through the office like she belonged. She started laughing more, wearing colors again, her hair loose instead if tied back in tired knots. People didn't see a struggling mom anymore. They saw a woman who had risen. And late one Friday evening, she stayed back finishing a quarterly report. The building was quiet, shadows long across polished floors. Daniel passed her office. He paused at the door. "You're still here?" She looked up and smiled. Soft, tired, beautiful. "Almost done." He stepped in. "Let me walk you home." Sarah bit her lip. "Again?" He shrugged. "Maybe it's becoming a habit." She laughed. And this time it wasn't just polite, it was real, light, joyful. And in that moment, as they walked side by side under the early spring sky, Noah asleep, streetlights flickering, something unspoken passed between them. Not fireworks, not some rush of passion, but something stronger, respect, trust, and the quiet possibility of something more, something that could heal them both. 1 year had passed. Spring sunlight streamed through the tall windows of Carter Tech's main hall, now decorated in soft blues and golds for the launch of a new initiative. Project Restart. The crowd was unlike anything Sarah had ever seen. Journalists, nonprofit leaders, business executives, young parents in thrifted clothes, even politicians. But none of them knew that in the back hallway, just moments before the event, Sarah stood shaking slightly, bouncing 1-year-old Noah in her arms. Her palms were sweating. "Why am I even here?" she whispered to herself, looking down at the baby in her arms. "I don't belong on that stage." Daniel appeared beside her, as calm as ever in his charcoal suit. But his eyes were warm, grounding. "You do," he said softly. "This entire program exists because of you." Sarah bit her lip, brushing Noah's curls from his forehead. "I'm not good at speeches." "You don't need to give one. Just be yourself." She gave him a skeptical look. "You once fell asleep on my shoulder in a coat that didn't fit," he said with a teasing smile. "And now you're the reason we're about to help thousands of single parents start over." He paused. "I think you can handle this." She smiled, and a smile at first, then bigger. The lights dimmed. A hush fell over the hall. Daniel stepped onto the stage, the Carter Tech logo glowing behind him. Cameras clicked. Phones rose. A few rows back, Sarah stood holding Noah, heart thudding in her chest. Daniel looked out at the room, then down at the note cards he didn't really need. "I want to talk about second chances," he began, "and about the people we too often look past." A pause. "I met someone a year ago on a city bus. She was exhausted, overwhelmed, and carrying her whole world in a diaper bag. She fell asleep on my shoulder. A stranger, because that's how tired she was." The room held its breath. Daniel glanced at Sarah. "She reminded me of someone I once loved." My mother, who walked to work in the snow with holes in her shoes so I could eat, who had no one but never gave up. He let that settle. I built Carter Tech from nothing, but somewhere along the way, I forgot what it meant to struggle at the bottom. Sarah Mitchell reminded me, not just of poverty, but of courage, the quiet kind, the kind that cries in silence and still shows up anyway. People turned to look at Sarah now. She shifted under the weight of it, but Noah reached up and patted her cheek, as if to say, "You're okay, Mama." Daniel smiled. So today we're launching Project Restart, a program to provide jobs, paid training, and childcare assistance to single parents re-entering the workforce. We've partnered with community shelters, women's centers, and dozens of companies who want to help. He stepped aside slightly. And I want you to meet the reason this exists. A spotlight gently followed Sarah as an usher guided her to the stage. Her steps were slow but sure. She wore a simple cream blouse, hair pulled back, and a silver locket that held Noah's first photo. Daniel met her halfway, steadying her as she climbed the steps. When she turned to the microphone, Sarah's throat tightened. Cameras flashed. People waited. She looked down at Noah, who had fallen asleep on her shoulder again, just like that day on the bus. She took a breath. "I never expected this," she began, her voice trembling but honest. "A year ago, I was just trying to get baby formula. I'd lost my job. My fridge was empty. I hadn't slept in 2 nights." Her eyes flicked toward Daniel. "And then I met someone who didn't look away, who didn't judge me by my coat or my tears, who gave me something I hadn't had in a long time." Another pause. Dignity. The room was so quiet, you could hear people breathing. Sarah went on, stronger now. "Not everyone gets a second chance, but more people would if someone just believed in them, if someone saw them not as a burden, but as a person, a parent, a fighter." A tear slid down her cheek, and she didn't wipe it away. She kissed Noah's forehead gently and said, "No, I never imagined my life turning out this way. But sometimes, life puts the right person in your path when you need it most. You just have to be willing to trust and rest your head." The silence cracked, and then thunderous, rising applause. People stood, some were crying, others were hugging strangers. The applause went on for minutes, not just for her courage, but for the truth in her words. Later, a reporter from a national news outlet pulled her aside. "Ms. Mitchell," she asked, "what would you say to those who think people like you just need to work harder?" Sarah looked into the camera without flinching. "I'd say they should try walking in my shoes. Try carrying a baby to work when the buses don't run. Try crying in a bathroom stall so no one sees. Try doing everything right and still being invisible." Then she smiled, that soft, earned smile of someone who'd known rock bottom and risen anyway. "And then I'd say, we're not asking for pity. We're asking for a shot, one chance, one moment where someone says, 'I see you,' and means it." That night, the story went viral. From Sleepless to CEO's right hand, the woman who inspired a movement. People donated. Others volunteered. A dozen companies called Carter Tech to ask how they could launch restart programs too. But back at home, in a cozy apartment filled with laughter, toys, and the scent of baby lotion and hope, Sarah wasn't thinking about cameras. She was sitting on the couch curled under a blanket with Noah asleep beside her. Daniel entered with 2 mugs of cocoa, setting one beside her. "You were incredible today," he said softly. "I was terrified," she whispered. He smiled. "Brave people usually are." She looked at him, eyes warm. "Thank you for everything." Daniel met her gaze, heart full. "No," he said, gently brushing her knuckle with his. "Thank you for changing my life too." And under the soft hum of the city lights, in a world that once overlooked them both, something quiet and steady bloomed. A love that healed, a purpose that grew, and a story that taught the world to see. Never judge a life by a moment of weakness. Sometimes the person who seems broken is simply carrying too much alone. In a world divided by class and judgment, a little kindness can change everything.